With just your standard cast iron pan, you can make an amazing crispy thin crust pizza without having to use a pizza stone or a fancy pizza oven. You can use a ball of pizza dough that you buy from the grocery store, or you can make a simple pizza dough yourself. Here's how I made mine. For one 10-inch thin crust pizza, I added 84 grams of water to a mixing bowl, 3 grams of salt, 140 grams of bread flour, and a quarter teaspoon of instant yeast, so a little more than 1 gram. Then I just stirred all of that together into a bowl until it came together into a shaggy mess of dough. It was really dry at this point, so I needed to knead it by hand. I kneaded it for about 5 to 6 minutes on the counter, just cleaning up that flour with the dough ball as I went, until eventually the dough held together and it had a roughly smooth surface on top. Once the dough was looking like this, a little bit smoother than when I started, I formed it into a ball, rolled it up into a ball on the counter, and then I moved it into a plastic container, making sure to add a little bit of oil to the container first so the dough didn't stick to the sides. I got oil on both sides of that dough ball, and then I closed the lid, and I just let this dough proof at room temperature for about 3 hours until it was nice and puffy. At the 3-hour mark, my dough looked something like this. Depending on the temperature of your kitchen, you can let your dough keep proofing until it's roughly doubled in size. With this method, the key to getting a really crispy crust is to put your cast iron pan on high heat on the stove for a couple minutes just to preheat. Then you don't absolutely have to do this, but I like to put a little bit of oil onto the cast iron pan just to create an extra nonstick barrier. But if you have a really well-seasoned pan, this is technically not needed. While your pan is preheating on high, go ahead and stretch out your ball of dough until it's roughly just a little bit smaller than the size of the pan. My pan was 10 inches in diameter, so I was stretching it out to about 9 or 10 inches. Use whatever technique you want to stretch out your pizza dough. I gave my dough a few stretches in the air first, and then I moved it to the counter. I tried to maintain a little bit of that air around the edge of the pizza rim, just to keep a little bit of a pronounced crust. And as you can see, I have a thin spot in the middle of my dough. Definitely try to avoid stretching your dough too thin. You might have that happen to you. You can always patch up that thin spot with some extra dough, but I decided to skip that, move this straight to the cast iron, and hope for the best. You'll see what happens with that in just a minute. Carefully transfer your dough onto the hot cast iron pan and then immediately turn it down to medium heat. Once the dough hits the pan, it's going to immediately start cooking the crust underneath. At this point, I like to move the dough with a spatula and try to spin it with my fingertips just to make sure the dough has cooked enough and it's not sticking to the pan. If you're not able to spin your dough around on the surface of the pan, just lift it up like this and reposition it. That should unstick the dough and you should be able to maneuver it around the pan like that. If the dough can spin, you shouldn't have any problems with it sticking to the pan. Now that the crust is cooking in your pan, go ahead and top it with your pizza sauce. I'm just using a can of crushed tomatoes. It's a brand that I really like the taste of, and I'm adding 1 pinch of salt to the can and just stirring that around. This is a really simple raw sauce that I like to use. Pretty much if you like the taste of the tomatoes raw, you're going to like the taste of it as a pizza sauce. You can of course add garlic or herbs or anything you want to your own sauce. I'm just adding 3 or 4 spoonfuls of tomato sauce to the pizza and topping it pretty lightly. As a general rule, it's better to undersauce the pizza than oversauce it. While the pizza keeps cooking on medium, I'm adding a few sprinkles of Pecorino Romano cheese. Any kind of hard cheese like Parmesan would also be good here. I just gave mine a few generous sprinkles of this cheese, and then it was time to check the underbelly of this pizza. With the stove heat and the cast iron, you definitely don't want the underside to burn. Since I'm seeing a few charred spots on mine, I'm shutting the heat totally off, and I'll finish topping the pizza. Next is the melty cheese that I'm using. I'm using mostly low moisture mozzarella, a few handfuls. It's actually a mix of mozzarella and some other cheeses that I had in the fridge for a different recipe. I would definitely just stick with mozzarella cheese though. It's definitely the best cheese for pizza. And just like the sauce, it's better to under cheese the pizza than over cheese it. While topping my pizza, I noticed that that thin spot in the middle had actually opened up and sauce was leaking down onto the bottom. I decided to block the leakage with 1 pepperoni. I saw someone do that with a basil leaf one time, and I thought I'd give it a try with pepperoni. For the last topping to my pizza, I'm adding these pepperonis that cup up under high heat. I really like that look. Once I've got my pizza topped, I'm checking the bottom and it's not leaking or sticking, so it's time to move this into the oven. For this method, set the broiler element of your oven on high and put your pizza directly under the broiler. That's going to be the highest heat you can get from a home oven, is putting it directly under the flame of that broiler. This method basically takes 2 minutes on the stove to get a nice crispy bottom of the crust, and then about 2 minutes under the broiler to perfectly cook the top of the pizza. After 1 minute, you should see the cheese starting to bubble like this and looking really nice. And then after 1 more minute, your pizza crust should be looking nice and browned on top, and the cheese should be nice and bubbly. For my oven, if I let the pizza cook any longer than 2 minutes under the broiler, it gets overdone, so watch your pizza carefully and pull it out when it looks like this. Move your pizza onto a wire rack if you're going to let it rest, or you can put it directly onto a cutting board, and as you can see, the bottom of the pizza is nice and leopard spotted, or burnt depending on who you ask. But because we spun the dough around in the pan at the beginning, there's no danger of it sticking to the pan. My underside pepperoni did the best that it could, but there was still leakage coming through. I hope you don't have that same problem when you're stretching your dough. Definitely makes things a lot harder. This pizza is definitely the crispiest the sooner you eat it, so go ahead and slice it right away. Couldn't find my pizza cutter in this moment, so I decided to go for a chef's knife, which was a bad decision. So I took a lesson from our friends in Naples and cut this pizza with the scissors. I went ahead and cut this into 6 equal slices, and I want to know from you, so let me know in the comments, if you have a pizza like this to yourself, how many pieces do you cut it into? 4, 6, or 8? Let me know in the comments. This pizza was cheesy and gooey, and as promised, had a perfectly crisp bottom. I really like the cast iron pan and broiler technique for getting that really crisp crust. Here it is, just in case you wanted to hear it. Crispy. I'm gonna go ahead and take this pizza and eat it straight off of the cutting board. While I'm doing that, if you wanna make this pizza yourself, the recipe is in the description. And if you wanna make a crispy pizza with a sourdough crust, use the recipe in this video right here.